After 10 years of carrying my parents, my dad handed everything to my sister who'd only returned 1 week ago. I set down the power of attorney and the house keys. Congrats, Lena, I said, my voice steady. Mom nodded, adding, she deserves it. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. The folder on the table between us, polished and neat, felt like a weight I couldn't shake. My father barely looked up as he spoke. He hadn't even cleared his throat before making the decision. We're proud of her, Kara, he said, his eyes focused on something far more important than me. It's time to let her take over. I nodded, though the words felt like they were coming from someone else. I was barely aware of the cold metal keys beneath my fingertips, the sharp clink they made when I set them down. The silence was heavy, thick, suffocating. My mother's gaze moved from me to the folder, a quiet approval in her eyes, her lips curling in that same smile she always reserved for moments like this. I didn't need to be asked to step aside. I had already learned my place. Lena had been home for 7 days. 7 days of well-meaning conversations and photo opportunities, of her laughter floating through the house like it was something new. She hadn't even had to ask. She was the future, the one who'd always been the promise, the hope. And me. I was the one who kept everything from falling apart. The one who made sure nothing broke. But now, after all these years, it was clear that my role had always been in the shadows. I didn't argue. I placed my hands flat against the table, the hardwood cool under my palms, and I left the room without a word. Lena, of course, didn't know any of this. She hadn't been here. Not really. She didn't carry the same weight, the same expectations. But she would know soon enough. That night, I left a letter for her. It wasn't a letter full of anger or accusations. It wasn't even written in the tone I felt inside me, which was sharp, bitter, seething with the years of suppressed frustration. It was simply a letter, cold in matter, of fact, a timeline of everything I'd done, everything I'd kept from unraveling while they pretended life was smooth. The next morning, as the sun rose over Savannah, I drove out to Dr. Hale's office. The streets were empty, the air still cool with the remnants of night. The quiet felt like the calm before a storm, though I wasn't sure if the storm was mine to weather anymore. Dr. Hale didn't ask why I was there. He just stepped aside, the door creaking softly as he motioned for me to come in. His office smelled like cedar and books, a place where the truth didn't need to be shouted to be understood. I set the folder down on his desk, and he didn't rush to open it. He didn't need to. He just looked at me, and I looked at him. When he finally flipped through the pages, his eyes didn't flicker. He read slowly, his glasses slipping down his nose, each page turning with a measured precision. His silence stretched between us, but I didn't feel the need to fill it. "You don't need revenge," he said after a long moment, sitting back in his chair. "You need structure." I let the words settle, feeling something inside me shift, a quiet acceptance of what had to be done. This wasn't about fixing things anymore. It was about creating something new. And so I did. The days after Lena returned felt like watching a storm roll in without being able to take shelter. She was everywhere and nowhere all at once. The house filled with the sound of her laughter, her voice ringing through rooms she'd barely been in for years. My parents beamed with pride, as if they were witnessing the return of something important, something monumental. They did their best to make her feel at home again. They talked about all the things she'd missed, all the experiences she could catch up on now that she was back. Meanwhile, I just existed. I spent my days moving quietly through the house, taking care of things that needed to be done. No one seemed to notice how much of the weight I was still carrying, even though they never asked me to. It had always been that way. My role, the one I hadn't chosen, was just part of the fabric of our family's expectations. Lena was never around long enough to see it, to feel it. There was an unmistakable difference between us, something I couldn't shake. She floated through life with a grace that caught attention wherever she went. Her long, dark curls framed her face just right, and the way she moved, like everything was effortless, drove people toward her. She had this easy charm, this lightness. My mother always said that Lena was the one who had potential, that she was the one who would go far. And she did. She went away to the city, built a career, made a name for herself. She was the future, the one everyone focused on. And then there was me. I wasn't the one who got the praise. I wasn't the one who got the attention. My parents were proud of me in their way, but they never saw the sacrifices I made. They never saw me work my late shifts at the care facility or how I spent my weekends dealing with paperwork, making sure everything ran smoothly while they played catch up with Lena. I was the steady hand, the one who kept the pieces together when everything else was falling apart. I had learned early on that my role wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It was about holding things up, quietly and without fanfare. When I brought home straight A's, my father barely looked up from his laptop, muttering a distracted, "Expected from you." But when Lena needed something, they jumped. When she needed a tutor, they hired one. When she needed money, they sent it without hesitation. There was one birthday I remembered clearly. Lena's was celebrated with sparklers, a cake that could have been mistaken for a work of art, and a crowd of relatives who swooned over her. Mine, just 2 months later, was a sheet cake from the grocery store, half frosted and already leaning to one side by the time I got home. My mother kissed my cheek and reminded me to grab my work uniform before heading to the facility. It wasn't that I minded, but that was the reality of it. I was the one who held everything together while everyone else got the glory. As the years passed, I stopped expecting anything different. I became the problem solver, the one who handled everything that no one else could or would. My parents took comfort in my reliability, in the fact that they knew I would always show up, always do what was asked of me. But when it came to things I wanted, things I needed, they never seemed to notice. Or if they did, it was always too late. When Lena called home, it was usually for money. She was always the one who had the big dreams, the bright future. And I was the one left behind, picking up the pieces. But I didn't resent her, not at first. I just knew the rules. I had learned early that wanting anything for myself would make me inconvenient, so I stopped wanting. I filled medication drawers. I folded towels. I helped residents write holiday cards. I became the person who solved problems quietly, the one who did the work without asking for recognition. It wasn't glamorous, but it was what I was good at. It was what I was needed for. And then, one day, it all started to change. At first, it was small things. Little cracks in the system I'd worked so hard to keep intact. Emails about state inspections, ones I usually handled, started to arrive without my name on them. Then there were meetings I wasn't invited to, ones about staffing audits, about succession planning. It was as if I didn't even exist anymore. As if all the work I'd done for years didn't matter. I walked into my parents' kitchen one evening, the smell of roasted peppers and something sweet in the air. My father was standing by the counter, speaking to Lena about vision ideas for the next decade. I waited standing just inside the doorway. My mother, leaning against the island, looked up briefly, nodding in agreement with whatever Lena was saying. They didn't even acknowledge me. When my father finally noticed me standing there, he gave me a distracted smile. "Kara, don't worry about the administrative stuff right now. You've done enough heavy lifting. It's time for Lena to take on bigger responsibilities." The word, bigger, echoed in my mind, a word that seemed to hang in the air between us. Lena stood beside him, arms crossed, a polite smile on her lips. She looked so comfortable in that space, as if this was all part of some grand plan that had always been in place. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but nothing came out. I couldn't find the words. My fingers tightened around the edge of my tablet, my grip so hard that my knuckles ached. My mother reached over, her hand touching my wrist lightly. "You're good with the behind the scenes things," she said. "Let her shine." Behind the scenes, the phrase landed like a stone in my chest. I stared at her, not knowing what to say, feeling the weight of everything I had done for this family pressing down on me. That evening, I found another folder on the dining table. Financial projections in Lena's handwriting. The numbers didn't add up. The proposals were impossible. But my parents had already signed off on it. They had already decided. I sat down at the table, the chair legs scraping against the floor. My breath steadied, thin but controlled. I didn't react. I didn't argue or correct the numbers. I didn't remind them who kept everything running for the last decade. I simply closed the folder, placed it back exactly where I found it, and walked upstairs. Each step felt lighter, almost weightless. It was as if I was walking away from gravity itself. I didn't look back. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed. The walls were the same pale blue from my childhood. Familiar, faded, indifferent. I kept my tablet beside me, letting the dim screen glow across my hands. The house was quiet, except for Lena's laugh drifting up the staircase, light, airy, unaware of everything that was about to change. I opened a blank document. No headings, no emotion, just space. The first entry was a timeline, 10 years condensed into bullet points. Medical emergencies, regulatory freezes, staffing shortages, the year we almost lost Medicaid support. Every crisis I had stepped into because no one else knew how. The second entry was a list of structural licenses, compliance standards, vendor contracts, hospital partnerships, every document that had kept the system intact. The real work, the work Lena had never seen. I didn't need to build a case. The case already existed. All I had to do was assemble it. The days after that moment, when I placed the folder back on the dining table and walked away, were a strange kind of limbo. It wasn't the immediate explosion I had imagined, the confrontation I thought would come. No, this kind of tension built quietly, like a storm rolling in before you can even hear the first thunderclap. I kept my distance from my family, moving through the house with a kind of stillness that matched the silence I'd created between us. In the days that followed, the cracks in the system became more obvious, more difficult to ignore. The emails I wasn't copied on, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the small, subtle decisions made in the background, each one was like a pinprick, slowly deflating everything I had worked to maintain. The facility began to feel like it was teetering on the edge of something, but no one seemed to notice. Not my parents. Not Lena. They were too focused on the facade, the too caught up in what looked good on paper. The financial projections, drafted in Lena's handwriting, were full of errors. I could see it. The numbers didn't add up. The proposals were reckless. But my parents signed them anyway, just like they'd signed everything else that came their way without question. I didn't expect them to understand. They'd never understood before. Why would this be any different? That evening, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, the weight of it all felt heavier. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the background, the soft whirring of the ceiling fan above me. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves on the trees, but inside, it felt as if the world had come to a halt. I stared at the same spot on the wall for what felt like hours, my mind racing through everything I had done, everything I had kept together. And for what? To be passed over once again. Lena wasn't interested in the operations of the facility. She wasn't interested in the logistics or the regulations or the long hours I had put in when no one else was willing. She wanted the title, the prestige. She wanted the part of the family business that came with all the attention, without understanding what kept it standing. It was during one of my late shifts that it finally hit me. I wasn't just resentful, I was done. I had spent so many years doing what everyone expected of me, doing the work that no one else could or would. But when it came time for them to choose, when it came time for them to recognize the value of the work I had done, they chose Lena. They always chose Lena. That night, as I made my way through the empty hallways of the facility, I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over me. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint trace of lavender lingered in the air, a reminder of all the long nights I had spent here. But now, it felt different. The emptiness of the halls no longer weighed on me in the same way. For the first time, I could see that I wasn't bound by these walls. I wasn't bound by their expectations anymore. The next morning, I made the decision. I reached out to Dr. Hale and arranged a meeting. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. When I walked into his office, The familiar smell of cedar and old books greeted me. It was a strange comfort, as if stepping into a place where truth had already been understood. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't need to. He simply motioned for me to sit, and I did, placing the folder I had assembled carefully on his desk. As Dr. Hale flipped through the pages, his glasses sliding down his nose, I felt a strange kind of calm. He read each page slowly, deliberately, his fingers turning each sheet with a quiet precision that felt almost too perfect. When he finished, he looked up at me and nodded slowly. "You don't need revenge," he said, his voice measured. "You need structure." I didn't say anything at first. I just nodded. It was the truth, and I had known it all along. This wasn't about hurting anyone. It wasn't about showing my family how much I had been overlooked. It was about securing something that had always belonged to me, something that had never been recognized for what it truly was. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. I worked with Dr. Hale and a lawyer named Miss Rowan to create a legal structure that would protect everything I had built. We formed a nonprofit foundation, one that would safeguard the intellectual and operational capital of the family business. Not one that would give me control, but one that would ensure that the foundation, literally and figuratively, was preserved. The Harbor Bridge Foundation. I named it quietly, knowing that it would be the key to everything I had worked for. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew it was the only way forward. This time, I wasn't going to be overlooked. This time, I was going to make sure my work, my sacrifices, were not erased. It wasn't about what my parents thought. It wasn't even about what Lena thought. It was about the truth. The truth of what I had done for this family, the truth of what had kept everything running, even when they had no idea. And now, I was going to, the truth was protected, no matter what happened next. I didn't sleep much the night after I made the decision. The weight of it was heavier than I expected, even though it felt like the only choice. I lay in bed, the soft ticking of the clock the only sound in the room. The world outside was still quiet, as if it too was holding its breath. I had spent so many years quietly carrying the burden of my family's expectations, and now I was doing something about it. Something that could change everything. The next morning, I made a few calls, set up meetings, and began the process of securing the family's future without them knowing what I was doing. I wasn't sure where to begin. There were so many moving pieces, so many details that had been ignored or taken for granted. But it didn't matter. I had worked in the shadows for so long that I knew how to build something solid, how to make it last, even if no one would ever see it. I reached out to Dr. Hale again, who was more than willing to help. His calm, no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. He understood the importance of what I was trying to do, and he had the right connections to get things done quickly. Within a few days, I met with him in his office, the same office that smelled of cedar and old books, a smell that always made me feel like I was stepping into a space where things were clear, where the truth was always just beneath the surface. "I've been thinking," he said as I sat across from him, "this isn't just about protecting the assets. It's about protecting everything you've built. The work, the system, the people who depend on it." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time, someone else saw what I had built. It wasn't just the buildings or the paperwork or the regulations, it was everything that held it all together. The systems that I had put in place over the years, the relationships I had cultivated with staff, with doctors, with families, they were all part of the foundation, invisible but crucial. Dr. Hale's words echoed in my mind as I spent the next few days meeting with Miss Rowan, the lawyer he had recommended. She was sharp, focused, and precise. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, and that was exactly what I needed. We spent hours going through the documents, setting up a nonprofit foundation that would hold the intellectual and operational capital of the family business. It wasn't about ownership or control, it was about safeguarding the legacy, making sure it didn't crumble just because my parents were too caught up in their image to see what really mattered. I called it the Harbor Bridge Foundation. The name came to me in a quiet moment, and it felt right. A bridge to carry what I had built, something steady and strong for those who needed it most. It was a quiet rebellion, a way of reclaiming my power without making a scene. Over the next few weeks, I worked in the background, setting everything up. I had to be careful, making sure my parents didn't notice what I was doing. Every document had to be signed, notarized, and filed. The more I worked, the more it felt like I was building something from the ground up, something that would stand even after they were gone. When the paperwork was done, I sat back for a moment, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of victory. Just a quiet sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. This was the right thing to do. This was the only way to make sure everything I had sacrificed for wasn't lost. The next step was more delicate. I had to make sure my parents, Lena, too, wouldn't be able to undo what I had done. The last thing I wanted was for them to see it as some kind of betrayal. So, I made sure everything was in order before I took the next step. I couldn't afford to be emotional about this. I couldn't let the years of frustration cloud my judgment. I had to be calm, precise, methodical. When I finally put the final pieces in place, I knew it was time. But I wasn't ready for what would come next. I wasn't prepared for the moment I would finally show my parents what I had done, what I had protected. I stood in the living room one evening, the light outside fading into dusk. The house felt quieter than usual, the air thick with something unspoken. I had been holding my breath for so long that it was hard to let it out. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, discussing something trivial, as usual. Lena wasn't home yet. I felt a strange kind of calm wash over me as I walked into the room. Without saying a word, I placed the folder on the table in front of them, the folder containing the Harbor Bridge Foundation documents, and all the legal transfers I had made. My father looked at it first, his eyes flicking over the papers without a second thought. "It's nothing to worry about," I said, my voice steady. "Just some updates. You'll find the details all in there." My mother barely glanced at it, too busy with whatever she was saying to my father. But I knew they both heard me. I could feel it in the air. Later that night, I heard Lena's laughter echoing through the house. It was bright and full of life, as always. But as I sat in the quiet of my room, I knew things were about to change. She would know soon enough. And when she did, I wasn't sure what would happen next. But I was ready for whatever came. I had done what I needed to do. Now, it was only a matter of time before they all understood what I had been carrying all these years. The days after I placed the folder on the table were unsettlingly calm, at least on the surface. My parents moved through their routines as if nothing had changed. Lena was still catching up with old friends, and the house remained unchanged in its rhythm. But underneath it all, something was shifting. I could feel it, though no one had said anything directly. It was in the way my father's smiles grew a little more distant, in the way my mother's gestures became a little more calculated. They didn't know it yet, but the foundation I had built in the shadows had already started to move. I spent most of my time at the facility trying to focus on the day-to-day tasks that had always filled my life. The hum of the refrigeration unit in the supply room, the steady rhythm of the clock on the wall, and the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the hall, these were the things that grounded me. I knew them by heart. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faintest trace of lavender, the murmur of voices from the nurse's station, the clink of metal trays being prepared for the next meal. It was the world I had created, the world I had kept alive for so long. But as I moved through it, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before, a tension that seemed to settle on my shoulders. I wasn't sure if it was because I knew I had done something irreversible or if it was because I was waiting for the storm to hit. Either way, it was hard to ignore. Lena called a few times during the week, as she often did. She wanted to catch up, talk about her latest project, ask for more money. She always kept things light, as though there was nothing urgent on her mind, nothing weighing her down. And yet, Each time we spoke, I could feel the distance between us growing. She had no idea what I had done, what I was holding back. To her, everything was still the same. She was the future of the family, the one everyone looked to for answers, for direction. And I was the one who had kept everything running, but now I was standing on the sidelines. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of the office, the walls painted in that sterile, impersonal shade of gray, I started to feel the first stirrings of what was to come. The phone buzzed on the desk, an unfamiliar number. I picked it up and answered without thinking. Miss Hart. The voice was formal, businesslike. This is Mr. Hayes, your parents' attorney. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the family legacy celebration. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The celebration, the one where everything was going to change. I'm sorry, I said, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't aware there was a meeting scheduled. Wes, it's a formal event set for next week, he continued, his tone not unkind but filled with an edge of professionalism that felt almost cold. Your parents requested your presence. They'd like you to review the final details. Of course they did. They had never once asked me for input before. But now they were asking me to come, to be part of the decision-making process after all these years. I could feel the thin veil of control slipping away. It was as if they wanted to make sure everything was still in order before they handed the reins over to Lena. I'll be there, I replied, though the words didn't feel like they belonged to me. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The buzzing of the air conditioning was the only sound in the room, its quiet hum filling the silence. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I had spent so many years keeping everything together, keeping everyone at arm's length, but now it felt like I was being pulled back into the same cycle. I wasn't sure what to expect when I showed up, but I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. The next few days passed in a blur. I continued with my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the meeting, to the folder on the table, to the foundation I had created. I had done everything I could to make sure the family's legacy was protected, to ensure that everything I had worked for wouldn't be lost. But now I had to face the consequences of my actions. When the day of the meeting arrived, I dressed carefully, though there was no need to impress anyone. I had long stopped caring about appearances. I had to show up, but I wasn't going to play their game. I wasn't going to pretend I still belonged in the role they had assigned me. The office felt colder than I remembered when I walked in. My father was already there, his face unreadable, his hands clasped together in front of him. My mother sat beside him, her usual smile replaced with something more calculating. Lena wasn't there yet, but I could feel her presence looming over the room. She was the one everyone had been waiting for, the one who would take everything from here on out. We've been reviewing the final details, my father said, his voice deep and unsteady as though he could sense that something wasn't right. Lena will be taking over as planned. I nodded, though I felt the familiar ache of resentment rising in my chest. It wasn't the words he spoke, it was the certainty in his voice, the assumption that Lena had earned this role, that she deserved it simply because she was who she was. But I wasn't about to let them continue on with this illusion, not anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the table in front of them. My father's eyes flicked over the top of it, his expression unreadable. "What is this?" he asked, his voice still steady, though I could see the tension building in his shoulders. "Just a few updates," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You'll find all the details inside. The documents are final." My mother reached for it first, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. Her gaze flickered back and forth across the text, and I could see the shock slowly beginning to sink in. "Kara," she whispered, her voice thin, "what have you done?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. This wasn't about explaining myself. It was about letting them see the truth. The truth of everything I had been doing in the background, everything I had kept from falling apart. My father's face went pale as he read further. His hand shook as he reached the section detailing the Harbor Bridge Foundation. This can't be right, he muttered, his voice cracking. I leaned forward slightly. It's all there, I said quietly. The foundation holds everything, everything that matters. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of the truth I had just dropped into their laps. My mother's eyes widened, the shock settling into disbelief. Lena still wasn't there, but I could almost hear her walking into the room, ready to take over the legacy she thought was already hers. I wasn't finished yet, but for now all I could do was wait. The truth would come for them soon enough. The room felt unnervingly quiet as my parents stared at the papers in front of them. My father's eyes scanned the legal language, his lips moving slightly as he read each word, though I could see the confusion creeping into his expression. My mother's gaze was fixed on the same pages, but her fingers trembled as she held them, unable to process what they were reading. Finally, my father broke the silence. Kara, his voice was strained, more fragile than I'd ever heard it. What is this? What have you done? I didn't answer right away. The room seemed to close in around us. The low hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the faint tick of the clock on the wall, everything felt distant, muted, as if the world outside had fallen away, leaving only this moment heavy and raw. I've made sure the foundation is secure, I said quietly, watching my father's face as he read the document. The one that would change everything. I've protected everything that matters. My mother's face turned pale as she read further. Her breath caught in her throat when she reached the section detailing the Harbor Bridge Foundation, the one I had set up to hold the family's operations and assets. Her lips trembled, and she looked at me, confusion turning into disbelief. You can't. She stopped herself as if trying to piece together what I had done, what she was now learning. You can't just take everything like this. We've worked for this. This is our legacy. I shook my head. No, it's not. This is my legacy, the work I've done for years. The work you never saw. It's not just about the name, it's about what holds it together. The tension in the room was thick, heavy, and I could see my parents struggling to make sense of what I was saying. They had always dismissed my work, my sacrifices. But now, with one document, I had taken away the thing they had thought would always be theirs. You've been keeping this from us. My father's voice was barely a whisper, a mixture of hurt and anger. No, I said, my voice still steady, though I could feel the weight of my choices settling in my chest. I've been keeping it from falling apart. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and I knew immediately that Lena had arrived. I could hear her louder before I saw her, light and unburdened, as if nothing in the world could touch her. She stepped into the room, glancing from my parents to the papers in front of them, her eyes flicking between us. What's going on? She asked, her voice still carrying that confident tone, unaware of the storm that had already started to brew in the room. Lena's eyes landed on the documents, and I saw the moment she understood. Her expression shifted, though she tried to keep her calm facade intact. What is this? She asked, her voice faltering for the first time. She took a step forward, reaching for the folder, her fingers brushing the pages I had carefully prepared. Her lips parted as she read, and I watched as the shock set in. I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't need to explain the details or the plan. She could read it for herself. The longer she read, the more her confidence slipped away. She flipped through the pages, her hands shaking now, and when she reached the last part of the document, the section about the legal transfers and the foundation, I could see her face go pale. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. This can't be right. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the fine print, her fingers turning the pages faster, more frantic now. You're joking, right? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just watched as the truth sank in, watching her fight to reconcile the image of the legacy she thought was hers with the cold, hard reality in front of her. You, she started, her voice cracking as she struggled to find words. You can't just take this from us. From me. You never saw what was holding it up. I said quietly, the words coming easier now, though they felt heavy in my chest. You never saw the work that kept it all from falling apart. You thought you were inheriting something real, but it's not just the buildings or the name. It's the system I built. Lena took a step back, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she tried to process everything. Her hand shook as she held the letter, and I could see her trying to make sense of the facts in front of her. I can't. This isn't what I thought it was. This isn't how it was supposed to be. I know, I said softly, but there was no bitterness in my voice. There was no satisfaction in her pain. But you never asked. You never understood what it took to keep this going. I didn't do this to punish you. I did this to protect what matters. She didn't speak again for a long while, and I could feel the tension in the room tightening as my parents sat there, their stunned silence a reflection of the shock that was still settling over them. Mr. Hayes, the family's lawyer, had been sitting in the corner, barely noticed up until now. He cleared his throat and stood up, stepping into the space that had suddenly become too small for all of us. "Everything in that packet is accurate," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "The transfers were executed 3 years ago, under the full authority of Miss Hart, who held the power of attorney at that time. All signatures were obtained with the understanding that this would happen." I saw my father's face drain of color as the realization hit him. "Without our consent." His voice cracked as he looked at Mr. Hayes. "With your signatures, yes," Hayes replied, his tone polite but firm. "You approved it at the time, and we have third-party verification confirming the necessity of these actions." My mother's face twisted in disbelief, her hand reaching for one of the pages, her eyes scanning it desperately. "This says we don't own anything anymore. That the facilities are just buildings without the structure to run them." "Exactly," I said quietly, the words coming more easily now. "Just buildings. Without the system, without the work that I've put in, it's nothing." Lena stood frozen, her hands still gripping the letter, her breath ragged. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even look at me. Her eyes darted back and forth between the pages, trying to make sense of what I had done. But she couldn't. She hadn't been here for any of it. She hadn't seen what I had built. And my parents' gaze shifted toward me. It wasn't the look I had expected. There was no anger in their eyes, no shouted accusations. They didn't seem to know how to react to the truth that had just been laid bare. They had always been so focused on appearances, on what others saw, that they never stopped to ask what was really holding it all together. And as I watched them struggle with that truth, I knew there was nothing left to fix. The system would speak for itself from here on out. The fallout came quickly. It wasn't the explosion I'd expected, though. It wasn't the yelling or the arguments or even the tears that I had braced myself for. No, it was worse. It was the silence. The kind of silence that fills the room with a weight you can't escape from, no matter how hard you try. Lena didn't say anything more. She just stood there, the letter still clutched in her hands, staring at the pages like she was hoping they would change if she looked at them long enough. I saw the way her hands trembled, her face pale, her posture stiff with disbelief. She didn't understand yet. She didn't get that she had never been a part of what made this work. She had always been the one with the dreams, the one who got everything handed to her without asking. But now that the truth was staring her in the face, she didn't know how to handle it. I watched her for a moment longer, then turned to my parents. Their expressions were unreadable, but I saw the tightness in their jaws, the way they avoided looking at me directly. They were still processing what had just happened. They hadn't said a word since I revealed the foundation, since I placed the documents in front of them. The anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface. But it wasn't the kind of anger that came from confrontation. It was the kind that came from being blindsided, from realizing that you had missed something huge, something that had been happening right in front of you for years. "Kara," my father said after what felt like hours, his voice strained. "You've gone too far with this." I didn't answer him. There was nothing left to say. Too far. My mother's voice cracked as she spoke, her eyes darting back and forth between the papers and me. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. You can't just take everything like this. I felt a rush of heat flush my face, but I kept my expression calm. It didn't take anything, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I protected it. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. The truth was out now. There was no turning back. They didn't respond right away, and I let the silence stretch between us. I didn't need to say any more. I had done what I set out to do. I had made sure that everything I had built wasn't just a name, a legacy. They couldn't take it away. Not anymore. Lena finally spoke, her voice shaking with frustration. "This isn't fair," she muttered, barely above a whisper. "You can't just do this to us." "I didn't do anything to you," I said softly, my voice still calm, though I could feel the tension building. "I did this for the people who rely on this system. The residents, the staff, the families who depend on it. This is what matters. Not the name, not the title." Lena opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was still processing, still too lost in her own shock to understand what I was trying to say. I wasn't doing this to hurt her. I wasn't doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing it to stop the system from collapsing, to stop them from pretending that everything would continue as it always had. "We'll fix this," my father finally said, his voice shaky. "We'll fix it, and we'll make sure Lena takes over like it was always planned." I shook my head. "It's not about Lena taking over," I said, the words coming out more forcefully now. "It's about the work, the foundation, the system. You can't just hand her a title and think everything will be fine. It doesn't work that way." The words hung in the air between us, too sharp, too real. For the first time, I could see them questioning the choices they'd made, the way they had dismissed me, the way they had always relied on me but never really seen me. Lena's face was flushed now, her eyes wide with disbelief and anger. She had always been the one with the dreams, the one everyone had hoped would carry on the family name. But the truth was, she had never understood what went into keeping the system alive. She had never seen the late nights, the phone calls, the work that no one ever appreciated. "Lena," I said softly, though my words felt like they were reaching her from a great distance. "You never saw what it really took. You never saw the work. You were always the face, the one everyone loved, but I was the one who kept it going. I was the one who kept the pieces from falling apart." I saw her flinch at my words, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, walking quickly to the door. "I can't deal with this right now," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I can't," and with that, she was gone, leaving the room thick with tension. I stood there for a moment, the quiet weighing heavily on me. I had expected a fight, expected an explosion. But this silence was worse than anything I could have imagined. It was as if the truth had hit them harder than I ever thought it would. I could hear my parents whispering in the background, trying to make sense of it all, but I didn't feel the need to stay. I didn't need to explain myself. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was out of my hands. The system I had built was protected. I walked out of the room, leaving the quiet chaos behind me. The halls of the house seemed emptier now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. I had done what I set out to do, but now I was done. The silence that followed was not the end I had expected. It wasn't a final confrontation or a moment of grand victory. It was just quiet, the kind of quiet that settled in after a storm had passed, when everything had been rearranged and nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt the strange, unsettling peace of knowing that it was finally over. That, for the first time, I had let go of everything that had been holding me down. The next few days passed in a blur, like the world had shifted just enough that nothing felt familiar anymore. The chaos of my family's reactions had faded, replaced by a quiet, unsettling calm. It was a stillness I wasn't used to, one that pressed down on me more heavily than any argument or confrontation ever could. I had done what I set out to do. I had finally let go of the role I had been playing for so long, but in doing so, I felt like I had lost something I didn't even know I needed. There were no more late night phone calls, no more paperwork to fill out or problems to fix. The weight of my parents' expectations had lifted, but so had the burden of my purpose. I had spent so many years finding my identity in their needs, in their approval. Without that, I felt a kind of emptiness that I hadn't expected. The silence in the house was both a relief and a challenge. It was the first time in years that I wasn't carrying something heavy, but it also left a hollow space where my role used to be. I saw my parents a few times after the meeting. It was always brief, a passing glance at the grocery store or a brief exchange at a family event. They never came to me with the urgency they once had. They never asked for help or looked to me to solve their problems. The dynamic had shifted, and with it, the way they saw me had changed. But it wasn't just the way they looked at me, it was the way I saw myself. For the first time, I was free. Free from the expectations. Free from the role I had been forced into. But I couldn't help but wonder if this freedom came at a cost. I had stepped away from everything, and now there was nothing to hold on to, no cause, no purpose. Just silence. I walked into a new chapter of my life, one that felt unfamiliar and a little uncertain. The morning sun streamed through the windows, the casting long shadows across the room as I set down my keys on the small table by the door. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside, the hum of traffic in the distance. The world outside was moving forward, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to keep up with it. I wasn't trying to hold everything together. It felt good to finally let go. To not be the one who solved every problem. To not be the one who fixed everything when it broke. But there was a part of me that missed the work. Missed the feeling of being needed, of being the one people relied on. As I sat down at my desk, I realized that I didn't feel the rush of freedom I had expected. I didn't feel like I had won, like I had finally come out on top. I just felt empty. I had given so much of myself to my family, to their legacy, and now that it was over, I didn't know what to do with the space I had carved for myself. But as I opened the folder on my desk, the one filled with plans for the future, I remembered something. Something small, but important. The work I had done wasn't just about the family or about the legacy they wanted to pass on. It was about the people I had helped, the lives I had impacted. It was about the system I had built, the foundation I had put in place to make sure everything ran smoothly. The people I had worked with over the years, doctors, nurses, patients, those were the ones who depended on me. And now, even though the family had turned away, even though they no longer saw me as the one who mattered, I knew that I had made a difference. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the person in the background, the one who cleaned up everyone else's mess. I had built something real, something that would last even after they were gone. I could feel the weight in my chest lift slightly as I realized that I hadn't been just a fixer. I had been someone who made a difference. Someone who had built a foundation for others to stand on. And even though my family hadn't seen it, the people who mattered did. I wasn't sure where my life would go from here. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't carrying their expectations anymore. As I sat there in the quiet, the sunlight casting soft shadows across the room, I understood something. Freedom didn't come from fighting back. It didn't come from revenge or proving something to anyone else. It came from stepping away. From choosing not to fix what was broken anymore. I left the room feeling lighter, like I had finally closed a door that had been open for too long. And when I stepped outside, I breathed in the fresh air, the world outside feeling new and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, it felt like I could breathe again. A few days later, I ran into Lena at the grocery store. She was with a few friends, her laughter light and carefree as always. She didn't see me at first, and when she did, her expression froze for a moment. But she said nothing. She just nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix it. I didn't feel the need to explain. I just walked on by, the sound of her voice fading behind me. In that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. And sometimes Silence is the only truth that matters. I didn't look back, and for the first time in a long time I was free,